Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with this week in cannabis investing news from February 21st to the 27th. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, and then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and then take advantage whenever you're ready. We're going to start with this great news from Marijuana Moment, as nearly 500,000 Americans now work in the cannabis industry, according to a new Leafly report. And so the latest number that we had as of 2020 was 321,000. So we love to see that growth continue to accelerate as the cannabis industry in the US continued to grow in 2021, with almost 500,000 people now employed full-time in the cannabis sector as more state markets come online and mature, according to a report released by Leafly on Wednesday. That growth is expected to continue exponentially as states like New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut prepare to implement retail sales. But the new figures for 2021 are already sizable, especially considering the ongoing challenges businesses have faced amid the coronavirus pandemic. As last year was the first time that job creation in the cannabis industry exceeded six figures, with 107,000 new jobs created compared to 32,700 in 2019 and 77,300 in 2020. So as of 2021, there are 428,059 people employed in the cannabis space compared to 321,000 that prior year. And apparently no other industry in the US can match that. So while we might not be seeing this turn out in the share prices, we are seeing it on the ground. And so we know that in time, Congress is likely going to have to act sooner than later because of this and make the end of cannabis prohibition a reality. Especially if, just for example, we conservatively assume that, let's say, 20% of those workers, 100,000 of the 428, again, this is just off the top, I'm thinking out loud here, but imagine they are the dispensary storefront workers that put their lives at risk every day dealing with the cash and knowing that they can be targets for armed robberies. So if the Democratic Party doesn't want to completely sabotage America, the next logical step for them is to do something while they have the time heading into the election that would benefit this fast-growing industry, and the fact that 90% of Americans do agree with legalizing cannabis and ending prohibition in some form. And so this is the actual jobs report from Leafly. If you want to grab the link below, I will attach it. But on top of that news, Michigan is happy to report that the cannabis industry jobs see 72% increase in 2021, according to that Leafly report. So I won't go through this too much, but just to add, as individual states that have ended cannabis prohibition are already seeing the benefits, as the cannabis industry in Michigan continues to grow, and a new report found the state has the third most cannabis-related jobs in the country. As according to Leafly, there are 31,152 full-time cannabis jobs in Michigan, up more than 72% from the previous year, as Leafly reports that the state added 13,074 jobs in just 2021 alone. So good job, Michigan. On to this one from Todd Harrison, so thank you, Todd, for sharing this. This is a snippet from this link, so if you wanted to grab it below, but basically highlighting that this past quarter, likely from sales from October, November, and December, California reported that the state generated $308 million in quarterly cannabis tax revenue. So again, that speaks for itself, the benefits of ending cannabis prohibition. And when you consider the mess that the California market is, and there are so little actual storefronts in California representative of the population, there is so much more room for growth. So California lawmakers ought to be very happy with what they currently have and not take it for granted, because if they do want this industry to succeed long term, they ought to consider taking more steps to reduce the taxes now to allow the legal market to flourish and take out some of the illicit competition in order for the long-term success. And one example of that is the fact that a cultivation tax would have gone into play July 1st, an extra tax that wasn't necessary, and the government of California has already voided that one from going into play. So obviously they're happy with this, so thanks, Todd, for sharing. And then on to this one from Seattle Times, as cannabis sales increased across Washington state during the pandemic, and here's where sales soared. So data from Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board shows sales increased statewide by $450 million, or about 43%, from the 2019 to 2021 fiscal years. And the total retail sales in 2021 were nearly $1.5 billion. So good job, Washington State. More benefits to legalizing cannabis, as cannabis sales also generated more than $550 million in excise taxes for the state, most of which will be spent on public health programs as prescribed by Washington's 2012 cannabis legalization measure. More benefits to ending prohibition as you got tax dollars to go back into your state to help your citizens. And so this is just a nice infographic of cannabis sales surge across Washington state. Just to give you an example, as retail sales from cannabis grew by double or triple digit percentages in every Washington county from full year 2019 to full year 2021, ranging from an increase of 18% in Klickitat, County to 144% in Lincoln County. So good to see these sales growing in more rural areas, as the sales data suggests that cannabis use increased in most of the more rural parts of the state during the pandemic, particularly in eastern Washington. As one example, the biggest jump in sales was in Lincoln County, just west of Spokane County, I believe. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, where sales more than doubled by around 800,000 from 2019 to nearly 1.4 million in 2021. So again, good job, Washington. This is what happens when you end cannabis prohibition and do the right thing. On to Ohio, as Ohio apparently topped 381 million in cannabis sales in 2021. And we know that Ohio is a market with a large population, but it is a medical-only market as of now. While we do have lawmakers planning to try and legalize and get cannabis on the ballot for 2022, just wanted to recap. Now, I don't have the subscription here, so I can't read the whole thing, but just to highlight, Ohio reported at least 381 million in medical cannabis sales in 2021, according to state data, or roughly 72% more than what was sold in the state in 2020. So when you consider that that is a 72% increase year over year, and this is medical only, I look forward to the day that Ohio does legalize for adult use and we see these sales double, triple, and grow big time. On to this one from the Office of Medical Cannabis Use. Looking at Florida for this past week, from February 21st to the 25th, we see that one dispensary was opened in Avon Park, and that was by Surterra. While Florida's qualified patient count did increase to 684,473, which represents a week-over-week increase of 3,427. So good to see more Floridians coming into the cannabis sphere and choosing a safer, non-addictive alternative. Well, if we look at the dispensations, for February 18th to 24th, we see the number of milligrams of THC sold, milligrams of CBD sold, and ounces of smokable flower sold. And if you're invested in any MSO in Florida, you can check week over week whether they have increased their sales, decreased their sales, representing an increase in market share or a decrease in market share, and just to see how they are doing over time in this very competitive state of Florida. Now onto some news out of New Jersey, because this is obviously the one state that we're following very closely, as legal weed sales could start in New Jersey within weeks. But notice the key word here is could start and not will start. And while I do take this with a grain of salt, because New Jersey has done pretty much nothing since legalizing except for establishing the CRC, what we've seen since then is the governor of New Jersey and then the CRC, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, pointing the fingers back and forth, basically saying, no, you say something. Now it's your turn to make a statement. Now you go. Now you go. But for whatever reason, I am optimistic that this will get launched by 420, especially because of the delays that we have seen. And so just to add what Governor Murphy has said, after missing a self-imposed Tuesday deadline to open the state for legal cannabis sales, Governor Phil Murphy said Wednesday night New Jersey is within weeks of having existing medical cannabis dispensaries sell recreational cannabis to adults 21 and older. And this is what the established MSOs who already sell medicinal in the state have been wanting to do, especially because they've increased their cultivation in order to properly supply the demand. So this would be that first step in the right direction, and then allow the CRC to go through the rest of their processes, approve other applicants, and let them get started as well. And so these are his words. If I had to predict, your job shouldn't be to predict, your job should be to tell us what's going to happen, but if I had to predict, we are within weeks. I would hope in March you would see implicit movement on the medical dispensaries, some of them being able to sell recreational, Murphy said during his radio show on WBGO in Newark, adding, they've got to prove they've got the supply for their medical customers, and we do know that Boris has said over and over in interviews that they've increased their cultivation to make sure that they've done that, and I imagine every other MSO in the state has started as well. And he adds, I hope shortly thereafter, the standalone recreational cannabis operators will be approved to start selling as well. And this comes as the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission, which is in charge of regulating the new industry, is still reviewing applications for licenses, and the panel missed a self-imposed February 2022 deadline to open the state for adult use cannabis. And while they did meet on February 24th, we thought on that date they might have launched something, and they did not, unfortunately. However, New Jersey Monitor did report that they did make a change as the cannabis panel paves way for THC concentrate sales in the state. And so the move comes as the start of recreational cannabis sales remains stalled as the CRC continues to fail the citizens of New Jersey, but thankfully cannabis officials are already moving for dispensaries to sell a wider array of THC products. As during the CRC's meeting Thursday, officials unanimously voted to pass a waiver for medical cannabis providers to produce and sell cannabis concentrates such as dabs, wax, shatter, or oil, as currently licensed medical cannabis permit holders can produce cannabis products using flower, oil, or topical forms, and they can provide lozenges. As CRC Executive Director Jeff Brown said, he's heard from both industry leaders and patients alike that more people are asking for products in the form of concentrate. So while you cannot launch this program on time, it is at least a step in the right direction. So happy to report that. Well, as we move on to South Dakota, as Marijuana Moment Expungement highlights South Dakota Senate approves cannabis legalization and expungement bills while the House defeats a tax measure. And these developments also come as activists continue to explore ways to end prohibition legislatively or through the ballot, as South Dakota voters already approved legalization during the 2020 election, but the reform was struck down by the state Supreme Court following a challenge from the governor's office, which is ridiculous, but at least this is a step in the right direction as the Senate advanced SB3 in a very tight 18-17 vote. The bill, sponsored by Senator Michael Roll, cleared the Commerce and Energy Committee last week and will now advance to the House, and it would allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis from licensed retailers. And unfortunately, though, under the proposal, home cultivation would not be permitted. However, unlike under a ballot measure that activists have been collecting signatures for and are hopeful they can get included, while the State Department of Revenue would be responsible for regulating the adult use program and promulgate rules related to issues such as transportation and registration. Well, this is good news for the citizens of South Dakota who want recreational cannabis and voted for it in 2020. Sadly, Governor Kristi Noem is back at it again and threatening to veto this. So I'm not exactly sure if the South Dakota Senate works in the same ways as the Mississippi Senate and whether lawmakers in the South Dakota Senate could get enough votes to override a governor veto if that were to happen. I will update you as the story progresses. While we do have news out of Maryland, so thank you Marijuana Moment as well, as Maryland House approves bills to put cannabis legalization on November ballot and set rules, as the Maryland House delegates on Friday passed bills to put cannabis legalization on the state's 2022 ballot and set the initial rules if voters approve the reform in November, and I imagine it will be an overwhelming yes, as lawmakers have given the final passage to the referendum and implementation measures in votes of 96 to 34 and 92 to 37 respectively, sending them to the Senate. And so from my understanding, this will be on the ballot in 2022 for voters, and it also specifies that the purchase and possession of up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis would be legal for adults, and it would remove criminal penalties for possession of up to 2.5 ounces, while adults 21 and older would be allowed to grow up to 2 plants for personal use and gift cannabis without remuneration, while past convictions for conduct made illegal under the proposed law would be automatically expunged, and people currently serving time for such offenses would be eligible for resentencing. And the legislation makes it so people with convictions for possession with intent to distribute can now petition the courts for expungement 3 years after serving out their time. So great victory for those in Maryland, as they will be able to vote on this in November, and I imagine we will see another big victory for cannabis come election time. And so lastly, wanted to share this one out of New Mexico from MJ Biz Daily, as New Mexico medical cannabis firms are eligible for tax refund after a court decision. So while this doesn't affect any other MSO in any other state, I wanted to share it because it is a small victory for cannabis in the court systems, as New Mexico's High Court declined to hear an appeal regarding whether medical cannabis producers are subject to the state's gross receipts tax, meaning medical cannabis businesses in the state will be able to claim a significant tax break. As in February 2020, New Mexico's Court of Appeals ruled in favor of a medical cannabis provider seeking a refund of gross receipts taxes, finding that medical cannabis qualified as a prescription drug under the state's tax rules. And then the state revenue department then appealed that decision to the New Mexico Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court said nah and shut it down because the law is the law. And so there's more information here about that, but just wanted to relay this as this is a small victory for cannabis in New Mexico. On to this one from The Athletic, as the NCAA raises cannabis testing threshold by a small amount, proposes eliminating mandatory suspensions in a small change. I wouldn't call this significant. They could do a lot more. But the NCAA raised its testing threshold for cannabis and recommended reduced penalties for positive tests on Friday, in a significant change to the cannabis testing approach. As the new guidelines, which are in line with THC threshold levels established by the World Anti-Doping Agency, another joke of an agency, raised the threshold from 35 to 150 nanograms per milliliter, the NCAA said. And so you can pause to read more about the proposal here if you'd like, but I don't consider this a significant change. It's really just virtue signaling when the NCAA and World Anti-Doping Agency should just get rid of cannabis testing in general. Because if the World Anti-Doping Agency wants to consider themselves a standard for testing, yet they're going to ban Sha'Carri Richardson from competing in the Olympics because she tested positive for cannabis in her system months back, but at the same time, in these current Olympics, a Russian skater tested positive for some substance in her system, yet they allowed her to skate, and then they said if she wins, then no one else is going to win any medals. Then what is the point of testing for cannabis in the first place? On to this one from Ruby Devoy, an award-nominated CBD columnist. So thank you, Ruby, for sharing this one, as it is an informative one, a particularly powerful slide from the @drug_science presentation last night, highlighting the risks versus benefit of cannabis-based medicinal products. And while I'm not a scientist, but I do like to read on it and try to inform myself, it's very clear here that you can see that the benefits certainly outweigh the risks for cannabis. So thank you, Ruby, for this great share. And on to this study from Science Direct, as it highlights cannabidiol protects against Alzheimer's disease in C. elegans via ROS scavenging activity of its phenolic hydroxyl groups. And I don't know what that last part means, but I'm just happy to relay these two lines here because it tells us what we already know. It's time to deschedule cannabis, remove it from the Schedule 1 so we can actually start getting researchers to take this seriously and start researching benefits like Alzheimer's, as recent discoveries have implicated the potential of cannabidiol CBD in the prevention of Alzheimer's disease. However, how CBD affects such neurodegenerative disorders remains unclear because cannabis is still a Schedule 1 substance. So once we can deschedule that, we can find a lot more answers to some of the questions we have. While this one comes from Normal, as case reports cannabis associated with symptoms improvements in ADHD patients. This comes from a study out of Saskatoon, Canada, as the adjunctive use of cannabis is associated with symptom mitigation and improvements in ADHD patients' quality of life, according to case reports published in the Journal of Medical Cannabis and Cannabinoids. As Canadian researchers documented improvements in 3 male ADHD patients, just 3 patients, not a very wide-ranging study, but this is what you got to work with when cannabis is such a stigma attached to it, ages 18, 22, and 23. And following the use of cannabis, patients showed improvements in depression, anxiety, and in their ability to pay attention, as researchers said that the findings suggested that cannabis played a complementary role in the therapeutic regimen of these 3 patients. And again, while this is just 3 patients and not a reflective wide-scale study that can actually give us more accurate findings on a larger group of people, we could get more of that in the US if they were to deschedule it, but we certainly know that big pharmaceutical companies do not want people realizing that cannabis is a very effective ADHD medication. They'd rather people taking their opioids and sadly succumbing to potential addictions. And so last few ones, I wanted to share this one from Alex Jordan. So thank you, Alex, for sharing this. This is the recording of an amazing Twitter Spaces conversation between MJ Stocktrader and Boris Jordan, who's the executive chairman and founder of Curaleaf Inc. So if you haven't tuned in yet, I recommend you grab the link below and start listening because Boris has 30 years of investing in business knowledge, and few are freely giving out their insights and knowledge like Boris does. And so whenever he's willing to talk and give out some hidden gems, I'm always willing to listen. And so this one comes from The Visual Capitalist, part 3 of their 5-part series. This one is a guide to US cannabis. So if you've missed any of the previous ones, you can check those out too. If you want to learn more about how the US cannabis industry has developed over time to get to where we're at now, this is a great visual resource that you can grab below. And lastly, just a reminder that earnings for MSOs do start this week, and we'll have Green Thumb Industry kicking it off on March 1st on Tuesday, and then Curaleaf on March 3rd on Thursday. And so while this is not fully updated, I imagine, I think it's Alan Brockstein behind this site, New Cannabis Ventures. He will update it sooner than later, but just happy to relay that we will be able to tune in this week to see some earnings. And so I will cover Green Thumb's earnings on Wednesday, and I'll cover Curaleaf's earnings and a few others that get added in there on Friday. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update. Have a great week, everybody.